so much, and thanks, Professor, for coming along. In page 4 of your, well, 324 of your presentation, you spoke of the relationships, close relationships developed between banks, builders, developers, and political leaders, and that referenced the World Economic Forum in 2014, where in the reference it says among the poorest ratings was the item on favouritism in decisions of government officials. If you're familiar with that, can you give us some examples of favouritism?
I can't. You have to ask the World Economic Forum for that.
Okay.
What I was simply reporting was that there's a perception there on whatever the measures are the World Economic Forum gathers that, that there's a bit of
what metrics they use in measuring such things, or what do they make statements, what do they base them on?
If I had, I could look that up for you. I could certainly find out. I can't respond immediately.
Because it would be interesting if we could get an insight into that.
Yeah, I can provide that. Find that out.
We've had recent, just in terms of relationships specifically between the regulator and the banks, would you have any comment to make on that, or is there any economic forum that can focus on that?
I don't know of any comparative metrics, but you know, among the principles of good regulation, there are two things that good regulation always wants to attend to. You know, one is expertise. You really want to make sure that your regulator has really strong expertise, that your regulatory system has strong expertise in the area that it is trying to oversee, because regulators are there to stop people from doing things that they want to do. So people that want to do things will try to find ways around the rules. And even recently in the Financial Times, for example, it was, I believe, possibly Gillian Tett was commenting that American bank stress tests are possibly even still too lenient because the regulatory system is imposing stress tests that are too predictable. So, so the financial institutions and their professional advisors are organising their reporting system so as to match the tests that they need, that they know are going to be put upon them. So knowledge of the system so that regulation can be tough and predictable and not prearranged and so on. That's very important. And the second thing is, analysts of regulation have suggested that relational distance is important as well. In other words, that there shouldn't be too close personal or professional relationships between regulators and those regulated. So relational distance must be maintained, but expertise has to be prioritised. Now it's a difficult thing to pull off. The Irish system,
the metrics that we can use for this. I mean, what prevents regulator A and banker B from being pitched against each other in the Winter League and the golf club, for example?
That's a real problem. That is, I think, part of what I'm flagging, that we have a much tougher financial regulatory regime and apparatus now. But we can never be complacent about how well our institutions, our rules, our laws are operating, because there's no way of controlling all the myriad ways around the rules, including informal social interactions. So what's every bit as important is cultivating a changed insight into, a changed understanding of how institutions ought to behave. And that includes, I mean, institutions are not just, as I said before, formal apparatuses, they are also underpinned by ethics, by an ethos, by norms, by values, by ideas, by the ideas that people carry around in their heads about appropriate behaviour.
Would you say that, sorry? 2 minutes. Thanks. Would you say then that all of those things, the norms, the ethics, the practice, for want of a better expression, would you describe them as very low, acceptable, or high?
I have no metric against which to
other than your own experience,
to pitch that. What I'm suggesting is that the Irish record of how regulators were appointed and the kinds of skills they had available to them were not really optimally suited to meeting those sorts of criteria that I suggest, of the combination of expertise and relational distance.
Ought there be criteria then, and obviously now, that would or codes of conduct which determine how social interaction should be handled between politicians, between civil servants, between bankers, between regulators and so on?
I think all sorts of guidelines about appropriate conduct are desirable, and we have had new pieces of legislation, compliance legislation on ethics in public office and scrutiny and oversight of donations to political parties with a view to trying to control and eliminate inappropriate. But that's my point. It's important. But rule-based enforcement of conduct can only ever go so far. And what's every bit as important around that is building up cultures of the kind of ethos that you would like to see developed. And really, I mean, this is based on the kind of interpersonal expectations about what's appropriate in exchanges in relationships that are often unspoken. Codes of conduct can codify these things, and insofar as they help to entrench norms and diffuse people's expectations about what is appropriate, they're very important. So again, it's only through talking, debate, criticism, exposition of, critiques of, that we can really keep those to the fore of everybody's mind.
Is it those codes of conduct that